What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. And we've talked a lot about Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson over the last week or so. Those seem to be the top two names that the New York Giants are targeting at the quarterback position. But alas, a third name has entered the mix. And that name is Joe Flacco. Yeah, the New York Giants just had a visit with Joe Flacco yesterday, interviewed him, discussed potentially signing him. Obviously, they're still waiting for an answer from Aaron Rodgers. If Rodgers picks the Giants over the Steelers, well, then Rodgers will be the Giants' quarterback. If he doesn't pick the Giants, then they're going to try their best to bring in Russell Wilson. If that doesn't work out, it seems like their fallback option now is Joe Flacco. And we want to go ahead and discuss that, whether or not we would be happy with Joe Flacco signing with the New York Giants, whether we think this is a good idea, a bad idea, and what it would mean for the Giants entering the 2025 NFL Draft, and also talk a little bit about that right guard position that the Giants still have yet to fill. They did re-sign Greg Van Roten, which I think was a great move, but that's not necessarily an upgrade. That's a lateral move. Still hoping that they bring in some sort of upgrade at right guard. So we're going to go ahead and dive into all of that in today's episode. But before we do, Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? And what are your thoughts on the New York Giants hosting Joe Flacco for a visit?
Doing pretty good, and yeah, that's an interesting one, Anthony, because it says to us that the Giants aren't totally sure they're going to land either Rodgers or Russell Wilson, but it does just mean they're doing their due diligence, preparing for the worst case scenario, which I think every good GM, every good person in the front office should be doing, is preparing for the worst case. And when it comes to this situation, it is totally possible that Rodgers signs with the Steelers. In fact, I would even say it's probable. When it comes to Russell Wilson, I mean, I just was reading that Myles Garrett said he had a really good conversation with Russell Wilson, said that you should come here. Obviously, it's the Browns, and their history of being successful is certainly limited. But I will say this, their roster is pretty solid. Like, they have a good team, and they have a really good defense, and their offense, they have the draft, and they could always add another big piece. They could add a Travis Hunter to that room next to Jerry Jeudy. Like, who knows what they want to do there? So the kind of draft is up to them and their disposal. But I mean, the Giants, there's a world where they walk away from this and they don't have Rodgers or Russell Wilson. So, like, what's the next best option? It's Joe Flacco, probably. And listen, Joe Flacco is interesting. He's 40 years old. This is not a guy that you're banking on to save jobs, right? If you're the Giants and you draft Joe Flacco, you are pretty much guaranteed to have to go and get a quarterback in this draft class, because you can't roll into the season with him and expect him to save jobs. Like, you just can't. Russell Wilson might be able to, Rodgers might be able to, but Flacco is just not that guy anymore. And he's still okay. Like, don't get me wrong. For a team that's, like, looking for a bridge, like, and I'll say this, Anthony, if the Giants right now didn't have a general manager on the hot seat, Joe Flacco would make sense for the Giants if they wanted just a general bridge quarterback, didn't want to overpay, didn't want a multi-year deal, didn't want to have spread any cap hits into the future. Joe Flacco would be a good deal for them because he's going to be pretty affordable, and he can be a good bridge quarterback for a rookie that it just needs a little bit more time to get ready. So, I actually think that in a different world, different kind of universe here, Joe Flacco would have made sense. Same with Jameis Winston. But the Giants need to win, and they need to win games now to save jobs. So they need one of those two top guys, and Flacco is not one of the two top guys. He's tier 2, but he's interesting. And I did the math, Anthony. Joe Flacco last season, extrapolated over a 17-game season, would have thrown for 4,200 yards and 29 touchdown passes and like 35 interceptions. I'm kidding. It would have been something like 16 or 17 interceptions, which is still pretty lofty. This is a guy that's going to be very risky. He's going to throw the ball a lot. He is literally a statue. He cannot move. So you better have a good offensive line if you have Joe Flacco at quarterback, because you are not going to be able to depend on him to extend plays very often. He is going to make the reads. He's going to throw the ball hard. He's going to take chances. He's going to gamble on deep shots. He has a strong arm. This is what Joe Flacco is. He has massive limitations. But yeah, if we go into the season with Flacco as our starting quarterback, am I nervous? Yeah, I'm freaking nervous, dude. Absolutely. We are not winning many games next year if Joe Flacco's our quarterback. Like, despite all the moves that we made this offseason to reinforce the defense and brought back Slayton, and we're going to talk about the right guard position in a few minutes here. Flacco is a move that you end up with 4 wins again, maybe less. So, like, that's where Joe Schoen is probably thinking to himself, if it's not about money for Russ and it's not about money for Rodgers, I'm kind of in a difficult spot right now, because he kind of probably hoped it was about money, because he could always just pay that price to get those guys. But it seems like those guys want to go to a specific place. They want to land in a good spot. They don't really care about money anymore. They have so much of it. So that's where we ask ourselves, what do you do if you're Joe right now? Like, I know he's preparing for the worst, but yeah, like the drop off is pretty substantial.
You had some very interesting things that you just said there about Joe Flacco. Listen, first of all, I need to respond to the 17 game sample size extrapolation. I don't like doing that with quarterbacks because I think there's so much variance to the quarterback position. There's really no way to tell. Listen, you go through waves as a quarterback, right? You might have a stretch of games where you have a good matchup and a few good opponents on the schedule, and you do put up a lot of touchdowns. Maybe they're garbage time touchdowns, whatever. You can't really look at Joe Flacco's stats last season and extrapolate them because so much context gets thrown out of the window doing that, especially in an Indianapolis Colts offense that was basically yanking Anthony Richardson in and out of the lineup. So it's very difficult to look at Joe Flacco and what he did last season. I think what's more realistic is you look at his 2023 season where he won Comeback Player of the Year, and you see the way that he played in that season, leading the Cleveland Browns to a playoff berth with a really nice stretch of games down the end of the season. And what I'll say about Joe Flacco in terms of how effective he can be and his talent, I really don't think that the Giants would only be a 4-win team if they signed Joe Flacco. I think that you're honestly underrating him a little bit. He is a pretty solid player and he is a good pro, and like I said, he did go to the playoffs with the Cleveland Browns a couple seasons ago. So when there's talent around him, he absolutely can maximize it, as almost all 40-year-old quarterbacks can, because they've been in the league for so long, know how to maximize talent, know how to work in the confines of a game plan, and get the most out of those guys around them and get the ball out on time. Those are the things that Joe Flacco can do for the Giants offense. And what we saw a lot last season was the ball not coming out on time. Yeah, Wan'Dale Robinson was open, but the ball was late. Therefore, he only made a 4-yard gain rather than an 8-yard gain. That's the kind of stuff that we saw a lot last year with the New York Giants. It would be second and long or third and long because the ball is coming out just a tick too late from either Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito, Tim Boyle, any of them. None of them played on time necessarily. So we would see moments where, and you know what? Honestly, the one time that the Giants did play on time happened to be against the Colts. Like I remember that one reception that Malik Neighbors had in the flat. That ball came out real quick. As soon as he turned around, the ball was in his hands. He turns upfield, makes 2 guys miss, and he has a long touchdown against the Colts. That's what the New York Giants are hoping to get more of. They want a quarterback who can play on time. And all of these veteran quarterbacks can do exactly that. When you sign a Drew Lock or you sign a Tommy DeVito or you sign a Daniel Jones, all of these other guys that the Giants were playing with last year, you have to understand that that ball is going to come out a tick late, and that's going to result in possession catches. The receiver, whether that's Wan'Dale or Neighbors, making the grab and then immediately being tackled right where they caught it. With Joe Flacco, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, this ball comes out quick, it comes out on time, and it creates yards after the catch opportunity, which completely does transform your offense. And that's what I think the appeal is with Flacco. He does get the ball out quickly. He isn't afraid to take deep shots. I don't think the interceptions are necessarily that much of a problem. He had a few against the Giants, and that's ultimately what I think inflated that stat line, which again is why I have to mention context is important when looking at quarterback play. Nobody expected Joe Flacco to lay the goose egg that he did against the Giants. Nobody expected the Giants to win that game. In fact, we all wish that they didn't because we'd be in a much easier position right now to draft a quarterback. But nevertheless, I think that Joe Flacco is still a solid veteran and still a solid pro, but he would absolutely be an underwhelming signing for the New York Giants. We heard so much about how they were trying to pull off this blockbuster deal for Matthew Stafford, how they were going to make this major swing at the quarterback position. If they end up going down to plan A was Stafford, plan B was Rodgers, plan C was Wilson, and plan D was Joe Flacco, I don't care that they signed Javon Holland. I don't care that they signed Paulson Adebo. What does that say about how badly teams want to play for this team? Yeah, they got a couple of players in their prime because they paid a lot of money to a couple great defensive backs. I totally understand that. But if they have to go with plan D at the quarterback position, it tells you that maybe this isn't the most friendly environment. Maybe this isn't the most desirable landing spot for these free agents, despite the fact that they landed 2 big-ticket free agents. Yes, I understand that, and I think that's great, but the quarterback position is always the most telling. And if the top 3 quarterbacks decide to go elsewhere and decide I want to pass on the New York Giants, that tells me more about this situation than anything else. Regardless of who they signed, it's the quarterbacks that tell you the status of the team. So we know that Russell Wilson has been interested, right, Alex, for years to play in the New York market. He's expressed interest in the Giants dating back to, I believe, 2018. If now he has the opportunity to go here and he passes up on the Giants, that tells you everything you need to know about whether or not players want to join what we perceive to be a sinking ship with Joe Schoen and Brian Dable backs against the wall on their last leg. So I'm really hoping that that's not the case here, that the New York Giants are able to land Rodgers or Wilson, because that will at least instill some confidence in me that there is a perception within the league that this team can be competitive. What we heard Joe Schoen tell us at the bye week, and what we especially heard him and John Mara say at the end of the season, was that the Giants really were a quarterback away. That some quarterback play could have maximized more of their talent, and that they could have had a more successful season if they had the quarterback situation figured out. Now it's time to put up or shut up. The Giants didn't add any playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. They've barely touched up the offensive line. They're pretty much rolling it back with the 2024 offense that finished 31st in the NFL in scoring, minus the quarterback position. They're trying to upgrade there. So if this offense doesn't show significant steps towards improvement with that new quarterback, that tells me everything I need to know about this coaching staff and this front office, and that tells me that they have completely failed. So I'm hoping that the Giants do land the desired quarterback, the one that they want and the one that they need, so that they can maximize this offense and either prove us right or prove us wrong. Prove themselves right that it was a quarterback away offense, or prove us right that they have a lot of holes in this roster that they still need to fill, and this front office hasn't done a good job. So they better go ahead and land this quarterback. Again, no flack against Joe Flacco, pun intended. He is a good signal caller still at this age. He's 40 years old and he's still a very solid pro, but he is not the big swing that the New York Giants have promised us in order for us to get a clear look and picture at what the talent of this offense is actually capable of.
Yeah, I think the point that resonated with me the most is that if you aren't able to convince Rodgers or Russell Wilson to come to New York City, where, and by the way, Rodgers has lived here for over 2 years now, right? He has a home here. So if you cannot convince him to stay, that is a very bad sign for Joe Schoen and the outlook of what this team actually projects to be. And I hope that they do get one of these guys, because we need to reinstill confidence in free agents and other players, good players, that people still want to come to New York. You know what I mean? Like, players want to come here. They want to win. They want to compete. But the truth of the matter is, right now, they're talking about Russell Wilson's considering the Cleveland Browns right now. And, like, they're a legitimate suitor for him, right? The Minnesota Vikings, they're a better team than us. They have better offensive weapons. The problem is, Anthony, right? This is the problem, is that we did a lot of work on the defense, but that doesn't really, doesn't really convince a quarterback to go to a certain place, right? Like, defense is great, but they want great offensive line, great receivers. Like, they want to have a situation where they can thrive, right? The defense is just extra. So right now, Neighbors, amazing, right? We're lucky we have him, because otherwise we'd be literally a dead no to everybody, right? Even Joe might say no. So, I think Slayton extending him, he was one of the better options on the market for the price tag that we gave, $12 million per year. I'm not upset with that deal. I think it was fine. I think it was completely fine. A good quarterback will get a lot more production out of him than what we've seen in the past. Wandale, good player. I think he's a solid piece. Good short yardage guy. He's a very specific role. Theo Johnson saw lots of upside from him as a rookie. Offensive line, over the first couple of weeks, we saw upside, but then it all fell apart. One injury. We're like one Andrew Thomas injury away every year from like things being catastrophic. James Hudson doesn't really change that for me. And the Giants now have a chance to say, and I think this might be, I don't think it's crazy to think this, Anthony, because people were kind of like fighting back with me on social media yesterday that if the Giants do land Rodgers or Russell Wilson, I don't think it's crazy to think that they would say to them, if you come here and we're sitting at third overall and Travis Hunter's on the board, we're going to take him and make him a receiver for you. You know what I mean? We're going to give you another elite piece. I don't think it's crazy to think that could happen. I do think they're going to draft a quarterback. Don't get me wrong. I'm pretty much convinced they are going to, but I don't think it's crazy to think they wouldn't do that.
It's not crazy at all, and I'm not convinced that the Giants are going to draft a quarterback at number 3. I do think that if they land Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, everything is back on the table, and that's why I'm hoping that the New York Giants do land one of these two guys, because I want them to have every option available going into the NFL draft. I don't want them to feel like they have to do one thing or another. Now, you know my take on it. I say you draft a quarterback when you have an opportunity to. Those opportunities don't come around so often, so when you have a chance to take a quarterback who might be a franchise guy, you go ahead and you select that quarterback. So I would still probably advocate for taking a quarterback at number 3, even if they do sign 36-year-old Wilson or 41-year-old Rodgers. However, I won't be upset if they take the best player available on the board there, because they do technically have a solution at the quarterback position, albeit for 1, maybe 2 maximum seasons. They do have a solution, and you can build around that quarterback for a time and eventually plug in a rookie, maybe next year or 27, and then he's in a good environment and can thrive immediately and find instant success. So I agree with you. I think that if anybody's calling you crazy for saying that Travis Hunter or somebody else is an option for the New York Giants if they draft this quarterback, they're not looking at this from the right angle. And you know what? I'm actually going to bring up this quote yesterday, Alex, from Field Yates of ESPN, because everybody had one takeaway from this quote. I had a separate takeaway. I'm going to go ahead and read this quote, just pulling it up here. So this is what Field Yates said yesterday on Get Up on ESPN. He said, the New York Giants at number 3 with a head coach and a GM that are on the hot seat going into this year are not going to bypass Shedeur Sanders at 3rd overall if he is there, and they do not already have a veteran option at the level of Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. Everybody took away from this, man, Joe Shane, his love for Shedeur Sanders is true. If the Giants are picking there at number 3, they're definitely taking Shedeur. They missed the second half of the statement, and they do not already have a veteran option at the level of Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. What that actually tells me from this quote is that if the Giants do sign Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, the options are now back on the table, and that they do kind of somewhat feel as though they can win and add more talent around Rodgers and use that number 3 overall pick on a position that's not the quarterback position. That was my takeaway from that quote. Again, everybody took away from it, man, we're going to land Flacco and we're just going to draft Shedeur and we're not going to get Travis Hunter. No, my takeaway is the Giants are going to push really heavily in order to sign Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson so they don't have to draft Shedeur Sanders. Not that they're trying to avoid him or that they don't like him. I think they do, and I think he's a good player and a good prospect. But I think the Giants would ideally like to take the best player on the board if they could. So that's why they're trying so hard to sign Rodgers, because Rodgers reportedly might want to sign a 2-year deal and play for 2 more seasons. And if that's the case, you can punt on the quarterback position. Not saying whether or not you should, but you can. It puts the options back on the table. If the Giants landed Joe Flacco, they do have to draft a quarterback because he is not at the caliber of Rodgers or Wilson, and he is not a long-term solution by any means. Plus, he's not a guy you can even rely on to start 17 games for you because he hasn't done that in years. However, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, they've done that their entire careers, and they have shown no signs of stopping a 17-game season from continuing. So if you sign one of those 2 guys, you don't have to draft a quarterback anymore. All the options are back on the table. I totally agree with you, Alex. That was my big takeaway from that Field Yates quote. And I honestly think that if they do land one of these guys, things are going to get really interesting for us here on the channel. Because again, we've been doing all this work talking about these quarterbacks and these rookies that the Giants could draft. Now we could talk about everything. We can look at Travis Hunter and debate, should he be a corner, should he be a receiver, what's he better at, where does he fit better on the New York Giants? And I do totally agree with you. I don't think this offense is complete. The Giants have wanted to make a big splash at the playmaker position, have not been able to do so because of a thin market. But if Travis Hunter is sitting there at the board at number 3 and they just signed Aaron Rodgers to a 2-year, $90 million deal, it's really tough to go ahead, take a quarterback there and pass up on a potentially generational talent, explosive playmaker, potentially elite defensive back. But really, I think people overlook the fact that Jalen Hyatt has done 0 development here and Wan'Dale Robinson is in the final year of his contract. There absolutely is room to plug a Travis Hunter into this lineup and supercharge this offense with a quarterback conductor like a Rodgers or a Wilson who has all the experience in the world to throw on time and get the ball out to those playmakers in a superb fashion. So I really do think that's an exciting avenue that could open up for the New York Giants if they do sign Rodgers or Wilson.
Yeah, definitely. Just more options on the table for them to utilize. And let's talk about right guard for a second. Obviously, there could be more news that comes out today, and we'll cover that as it comes. But, right guard, I don't think the Giants are going to be signing any big names anymore because they just brought back Aaron Stinney. They brought back Greg Van Roten. They have Evan Neal transitioning over. They have a whole slew of players ready to compete for that starting right guard's job. I don't love that personally. I think if you're going to go with a rookie quarterback, you're going to go and do this. I get like they have a whole bunch of depth now, right? They have a ton of depth. But that also indicates to me, Anthony, that they don't trust they can develop players on the offensive line very well. They're going out and getting some, not even cheap. James Hudson's deal, yeah, the guarantees aren't much, but like he's still making $12 million over 2 years if they keep him, and with incentives. So like there's a lot of money for a player that's not very good. Stone Forsythe is another guy who's horrible for the Seahawks. Another depth piece at right tackle. So they're reinforcing the entire offensive line with depth. To me, it says they're probably going to do some major cuts in the trenches. Like Josh Zedu's, he's staring down the barrel of the shotgun right now. He's got to have a great summer if he wants to even have a chance at sticking around here, which is possible, but unlikely at this rate. I think they will draft an offensive lineman, but as you mentioned, they don't have to. Like, they're probably signing all these depth pieces, so they have options. Like, we don't have to draft an offensive lineman. We'll just go BPA and let the cards unfold the way they're supposed to. But when it comes to right guard, I would have preferred it to Tevin Jenkins. Let's be honest. Kevin Zeitler was right there, 1 year, $9 million. I don't know if he wanted to come back, so that may have played a part in why they didn't go after him. But assuming, let's say we don't know and he was open to the idea, 1 year, $9 million for Zeitler would have been a steal. I would have loved that. They would have had one of the best offensive lines we've seen in probably a decade on paper. So I would have loved that. They didn't go that route. They're going with a Greg Van Roten, Stinney, just a mash of below average talent that will be competing for that starting right guard. Maybe they have high hopes for Evan Neal. How do you feel about the outlook of this position? To me, it's not very optimistic.
They do not have their starting right guard on the roster right now. I don't think they're signing Stinney, Greg Van Roten, none of these guys to be starters on the offensive line. These are depth signings, and these are crucial and necessary depth signings. What we saw last year was an utter failure in adding depth on the offensive line. What went wrong for the Giants last year, Alex? They didn't make these kinds of moves. They didn't bring in a James Hudson, a Stone Forsythe. They signed Greg Van Roten at the end of the offseason, almost at training camp, just to get a name on the roster who could start. They're being proactive and adding all this depth now, sooner rather than later. You don't want to pick up the scraps, all of the left behind guys in free agency at the end of the offseason. Go ahead and bring your depth pieces in now, cut them later if you have to, but eventually get your starter in the building. The Giants definitely do not have that starter. I don't think any of these moves indicate that any of these guys are going to be the starters on the offensive line. I think the Giants are going to look to draft somebody, and if not, as I keep mentioning, that number 99 overall compensatory pick that they got, that could very well be used to trade for an impact player, very well could be used to trade for a right guard. We have seen some movement in the guard market on the trade block this offseason. We saw a few guys get traded. We saw Jonah Jackson from the Rams over to the Chicago Bears. We saw Joe Thuney from the Chiefs over to the Bears, left guard, but still a guard. And we saw, what was the most recent one that I'm thinking of? Kenyon Green from the Texans over to the Eagles. There's been quite a few guards on the move for mid-round draft picks. The Giants have an extra third-round draft pick. I expect them to either draft a guard or use that pick to trade for one, or go ahead and use the remaining money that they have in free agency to sign an impact guard. I do not think we're going to see Greg Van Roten as a starter unless we have to, but what I do like about Greg Van Roten, he increases the floor for this offensive line. We know he's durable, we know what he provides for us, and we know he's solid. He's not an all-world beater, he's not an all-pro offensive lineman, but he's an average starter. And the Giants have seen what happens when you don't have at least average players starting for you on the offensive line. When you've got an Evan Neal in there, it's so much more noticeable that he's on the field versus when you have a slightly above average starter in Jermaine Illuminor. We love Jermaine Illuminor. We talk about him like he's the greatest things in sliced bread because he stabilized this offensive line at right tackle. Guys, he's not that great of a player. He's good, but he's no Pro Bowl talent. He's no elite talent at right tackle. He's just good. But the difference between good and absolutely bun cheeks terrible on the offensive line is so noticeable. When you've got the worst tackle in football like Evan Neal was for the stretch that he was on the field, it's so damn noticeable. And then when you at least return to average, it makes the whole entire world different for you when you're playing on the offensive side of the football game. So that's the real key here for the Giants. They've now added in Greg Van Roten, Aaron Stinney, all these guys to at least bring their floor up and make them average-ish on the offensive line. They will look to find that impact piece to get that above-average impact player at right guard. It hasn't happened yet, but honestly, I think it's just because they're sitting in the cuck chair for Aaron Rodgers. They're waiting for Rodgers to make his decision. Once he's done with that, they will find their right guard. I have no doubts about that. Whether that's through trade, free agency, or the draft, they will find a way to add another actual upgrade to this roster at the right guard position.
Yeah, it's totally possible that guys like Greg Van Roten, Aaron Stinney are signing minimum deals with not much guarantees, so that way they can cut them without any problems. They can draft players, whatever it might be. I agree. You can easily cut Aaron Stinney in camp and replace him with a starter. So I hope that's not the direction they go. Right now, right guard is a major liability to me. I don't want to see Greg Van Roten starting there again. He's a great depth piece, don't get me wrong. I love him as a utility depth option, both guard spots and center. But please, don't use him at right guard as a starter again. You know what I mean? JMS needs a nice veteran presence next to him. Like, that's how you're going to spark that growth, right? Same with Jermaine Luminor. Like, I think he deserves to have a solid presence next to him. And the Giants have the money, right? They still have money to spend. So, like, depending on what happens with the quarterback spot, and I think that's kind of why the guard market slowed up a lot, is that teams are waiting to see what happens at quarterback before, and guards are waiting to see, really. Because if the Giants end up striking out on Rodgers and Russ, they're going to be able to pay Tevin Jenkins. And Tevin Jenkins is like, well, I might as well wait to see if I can get more money. Like, they're waiting to see if, those teams strike out at quarterback, and then they'll have a little bit extra money to spend on getting a worse option, but also reinvesting in the offensive line to make that worse option better. Like, that's how you can kind of even the scale a little bit more. So I think that it's in the best interest of these guards to wait just a little bit longer until these guys make a decision, Russ and Rodgers. And the Giants will have to, well, depending on what happens, either they will stick with what they got, if they go for the more expensive quarterback, or maybe they find a way to do both. Maybe they find a way to get Tevin Jenkins and get one of those big quarterbacks. They're going to have to create void years, push money into the future, but they will have a much better situation than previously thought, especially on a unit that has been just, horrible for so long. Injuries being the prominent factor here. Last year they had just signs of life. Signs. We're like, holy crap, like the first 4 games of the year, like this is a different team, different unit. And then one Andrew Thomas injury is all it takes these days. So, you have to be careful. I actually wouldn't hate, Anthony, drafting an offensive tackle. A guy with some upside to develop, athletic tackles, a guy that they can build, Carmen Brazil can work with and maybe develop into something just as an insurance policy at specifically left tackle. Like, I love the swing tackle. I love, having that depth there, but I would like to have a guy that has some actual upside to be solid. Like, not just a bad player that we're signing to be depth behind Andrew Thomas. I know it's important to have, but I would like to, if we have the opportunity and, that player's on the board and we feel like he's the best option at that point, if all the cards fall in our favor, I think that would be a great acquisition for us.
I appreciate you carefully picking your words there to make sure that you included the best player available counterpoint that I was going to bring up immediately. If a tackle is on the board and he's the best player available, you go ahead and take him. You knew that's what I was going to say. But I'm actually going to go in a different direction with this. I'm going to say this. If Andrew Thomas goes down next year, the reason the Giants did what they did on the offensive line so far through free agency was so that Jermaine Illuminor can comfortably move to left tackle, and a James Hudson or a Scythe, whatever, what's that guy's name? Forsythe, I think. He can plug in at right tackle. Or Hudson, whatever, can plug in at right tackle. Those to me were moves. Yes, swing tackle moves. Yes, depth moves. But they were also moves so that Jermaine Illuminor is the starting right tackle. He's right tackle 1. He's left tackle 2. Now they have some right tackles that they can depend on to step in and give them some serviceable starts if they need to. That's how I interpret the situation. Now, would I like to see them continue to add tackles? Draft one if one's the best player on the board, or bring in a legitimate fringe starter backup at left tackle? Yeah, I'd love all those things, but I really do think the Giants' thinking here is, well, we have a right tackle who is a pretty good starting left tackle if need be. So if Thomas does go down once again, let's actually reinforce the right tackle position because we trust Illuminor to make that flip to the left side and we trust him to play at a decent level. He can be left tackle number 2, and all of these other guys that we're adding to the line can be our backup right tackles in case of emergency. That's my line of thinking here. That's what I think the New York Giants are planning. But again, I don't think their offensive line is anywhere near complete. Alex, I'm going to throw this out there. How have the Giants not added any talent at center? I don't get this. This actually confuses the living shit out of me. I understand.
I think Ben Roten is the guy that they think will be depth.
Maybe. That makes sense. That does make sense, actually, because he did start a couple games there last year. But I just think, listen, John Michael Schmitz, I love him. I see the potential. I see the talent. But we haven't seen it consistently enough. We need to see more from him. The Giants need to add some sort of competition or depth at that position to hedge their bet here because, yes, we anticipate that he will break out this season, especially if they get a veteran quarterback for the reasons that I explained in a recent episode. A veteran quarterback takes a lot of pressure off a young center's shoulders in terms of calling protections and moving things at the line of scrimmage. All those things are true and constant. However, what if it still doesn't help John Michael Schmitz? What if he still doesn't take that step forward in his 3rd season? Then you have to start thinking about a replacement as he enters the final year of his contract. And I think that the New York Giants should absolutely be doing their due diligence to bring in some competition and hedge their bets at the center position.
Absolutely. I mean, they need to. The thing is, the Giants have had too many draft picks, like very valuable draft picks, not pan out. Like it's becoming it's too frequent. The frequent flyer miles are adding up for Joe Shane and the guys that are just not panning out. So I do think they need to double down on JMS. They need to make sure they get some value out of him. Like he was small, undersized, but he's extremely intelligent. And I think we've seen potential from him. We've seen the pancake blocks. We've seen him have some good moments. Like, it's just about consistency and having veteran experience next to you. The problem with the Giants, and I've said this many times, that they position players to struggle, right? They don't necessarily give these guys the best chance to succeed all the time, right? Neighbors, awesome. He was elite, electric coming out of college, but they gave him too many targets. Like, they peppered him, and it leads to injury. And we saw that with multiple concussions last year, right? JMS, how many different guards did we see alongside him during his rookie season, let alone last year? Like, it's not a sustainable place to develop if you're a team, that doesn't have good depth, doesn't have good starting talent. Now I think we're starting to see this get better. It's year 4 now. Like, it should have been a long time ago, but hopefully Joe's made a lot of corrections and learned from his mistakes. But I think that getting that cemented right guard, a solid player there, would really help JMS develop, right? And I thought, bringing Slayton back was great. I think that's fine for Neighbors, but they need a quarterback who's going to be able to spread the ball around, right? Neighbors was the only guy that was able to get open and the only guy that they trusted to get the ball to. And they need other people to be able to get the ball, and they trust, right? They had a lot of plays designed just for him, especially in the second half of last year's games. The first half, he would be like, I'm not getting enough targets, and then they would give him 12 in the second half. If you're a live sports bettor, you were probably very happy about that. So, I do think, they need to be better and more balanced and position their young talent to thrive and succeed. Tyler Nubin's going to learn a hell of a lot from Javon Holland. I think that's a great, solid acquisition. Paulson Adebo, awesome acquisition for Deontay Banks and taking pressure off of him. Brian Burns is supposed to help KT, and I think that he will, hopefully, we'll see more growth from KT this year. These are situations where I think the Giants will draft a defensive tackle, Anthony, and he's going to learn a hell of a lot from Dexter Lawrence. So they have these cemented guys. They just need a couple more here and there to really help the growth of some of these young players. I think we're getting there, but DT, it shouldn't be difficult to go BPA and get a DT in this draft class. Right, that's what I'll say. I think they should have a good opportunity to address some needs that they do have and position these young players alongside really good talent already to learn and develop very, very well. But it really comes down to coaching as well at the end of the day. And I don't necessarily trust Shane Bowen, but I do like Carmen Brasillo, and I think that there is upside there, and we'll see a better offensive line product this season.
I don't disagree with you, but that term upside when speaking about the offensive line just gives me so much reason for concern. Like, the Giants have never been able to unlock upside on the offensive line over the last 10 years that I've been watching this football team, I feel like. So I get it, there is upside with this unit. They did look better before Andrew Thomas got hurt. We need to elevate this floor and stop focusing on the ceiling is how I feel. Not you, not me, anything. Really, Joe Shane needs to start focusing on that floor. And again, I feel like he is. That's why he's signing Van Roten now. That's why he's signing Stinney now. But we do need to elevate this floor and the ceiling simultaneously with some impact upgrades on the offensive line and not just keep adding upside pieces through the draft. Yes, of course, keep drafting offensive linemen, defensive linemen, whatever, but we do need to focus on the floor as much as we do the ceiling for the Giants offensive line because we have not hit that ceiling at any point. But we have definitely hit the floor, and that floor has been a real fucking low for the Giants over the last few years on the offensive line. One thing that I want to say, Alex, you mentioned defensive tackle in the draft. I'm going to say this, and I know we're probably reaching the close of this episode. If the Giants are going best player available in this draft, there's going to be one major tell. They draft a defensive tackle and they draft a running back. Those two positions are unbelievably deep in this draft class. Extraordinarily deep in this draft class. Daniel Jeremiah said that he has 24 defensive tackles, Alex, in this draft class with starting level grades. 24. That's insane. He said last year he had 12. Double. That's ridiculous. So when you're looking at the depth of the talent on the trenches in this class, if the Giants don't take a defensive lineman, that's malpractice because you have to go best player available when you're on the board. So if they ended up looking at this roster and saying, oh, we've got Dexter Lawrence, we've got Raheem Nunez-Roches, we've got, what's his name, Roy Robertson or Henderson, whatever the hell. Yeah, we've got defensive linemen. Stop drafting for need, man. And you know what? Defensive line is, in my opinion, a need. So, fuck it. Reach for need in this instance and take a defensive tackle because there's so many good ones in this draft class. But I also bring up the running back position to mention The Giants need to start going BPA in these drafts. They need to start stacking talent at positions that maybe look like strengths to them because they really are one injury away. We're one Tyrone Tracy Jr. injury away from seeing Devin Singletary split carries with Eric Gray. That's the last thing any of us want to see. So if the best player on the board is a running back, Tyrone Tracy Jr. should not prevent you from drafting a running back in what is a loaded draft class. You know what's better, Alex, than having one starting level and talented running back? Two. Go look at the Detroit Lions. That's really the formula here. And you know what? I'll even say this, Alex. The Saquon Barkley Eagles, right? They were fantastic this past season. They had some really good depth behind him, too. When he needed to take a break, Kenneth Gainwell could go on the field and make some plays. Will Shipley had some nasty runs in that conference championship game against the Commanders. Depth, depth, depth. Draft the best player available. That's how you end up with depth. That's how you end up stacking talent at premium positions. So that's going to be the big tell for me. If the New York Giants are going to shift their draft strategy away from just drafting for need and reaching on talent, if they do end up drafting a running back at some point in this draft class, it will tell me that they actually went BPA with their draft picks this year. They took the best player on the board when it was available to them. Those are the two positions where we know this draft class is extraordinarily deep: defensive tackle and running back. And if the Giants are going BPA, naturally they will land a running back and a defensive tackle in this draft class. And that's what I hope to see. Just go BPA.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, I think that's kind of what I was getting at before. They could just naturally go BPA and get a DT. And this RB class, like, if you could land Cam Scatabo in, like, the mid rounds or something like that, like, the guy alongside Tyrone Tracy is going to be sick. Like, this draft is really strong at a couple specific positions. And I do think the Giants, if they get it right, like, this offseason so far has been good. If they get the quarterback and they get the draft right, like, you could see this team turn things around quickly. Like, you could see it. I pray. I want to be optimistic. Anthony, you know how badly I want to be past. I used to be so optimistic about this team, dude. I used to be so blinded by the rose-colored glasses, and I really wanted it to be great. And I've just been beaten to crap over the last couple of years. Like, my optimism has been buried under so much torment watching this club. But the truth of the matter is, like, we've seen teams do it before where, like, one year they're horrible and the next year they're competent. Like, we see it all the time in football. So now we just hope the Giants are the next on the list to go from, you know, worst to first, or even worst to competence. Fine with me. I'm not even asking to be a playoff team. I'm just asking to be, like, good enough to watch on Sundays. And, like, I'm excited. I'm interested in the team. I'm excited to see what they do. And, like, the future looks brighter. Like, that's all I'm asking for. So I think that they can do it the right way. And so far, I'm happy with Joe's moves. He's done really well with the salary cap. You know, last year's draft was great. Free agency so far, I'm very encouraged by, but there's a couple extra pieces, couple last pieces that need to be executed. Rodgers and Russ, one of those two guys has to be a Giant. One of those two guys, right? If you miss out on one of those two guys, the offseason's a loss. You know, it's an L, in my opinion. Like, you have to get a quarterback that's going to keep you in the running here. So, you know, we'll see what happens over the next couple of days, if not the next couple hours. Russ obviously making a decision probably sooner than Rodgers, having met with the Giants today. But, you know, well, Anthony and I decided we were going to do a short episode and turn it into a 40-minute episode, so this is usually what happens for us. But I'll let you finish it off here, Anthony. I'm sure we'll be recording soon enough if one of the quarterbacks make a decision anytime soon.
Yeah, you guys can expect a double upload, maybe even a live stream later. We'll see how it goes, depending on what the New York Giants do at the quarterback position. Hey, I'm actually feeling healthy today. I can do the outro. That's a great change of pace from yesterday. Yesterday, I was literally gasping for air, couldn't breathe, had to let you do your flight attendant impression and wrap up the episode. Today, I'm going to have some fun in my outro because I'm glad to be doing it once again. I watched a really good movie last night, and I'm going to ask you all to play a little trivia. What movie did I watch? Here's the hint. Paul Newman won Best Actor at the Academy Awards for this movie, and it was directed by Martin Scorsese. Alex, if you know it, feel free to blurt it out. Everybody else, let me know what I watched down below in the comment section. It was a great movie, and I really enjoyed it. But nevertheless, the New York Giants, what a fun discussion once again. Of course we went long. We can't help ourselves. We said we were going to talk about Joe Flacco in the right guard position. We ended up talking about running backs for 10 minutes. Who knows how that happened? That's Fireside Giants. That's what you guys tune in for. And so much fun we had here on this episode. And again, we'll probably talk to you guys again later today if the Giants make a move at quarterback. So make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. And comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. Listen to Apple or Spotify. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, catch you on the next one. Have a good one. And let's go Giants.